41 years ago, a young mother in the town of Harlow, Iowa, kissed her 2-year-old daughter goodnight and was never seen alive again. The next morning, her husband told the neighbors she had packed a bag and driven off with a man she'd met at a truck stop. The whole town believed him. Records show the county sheriff wrote it down as a voluntary departure and closed the file before the corn was fully out of the fields. But one person never believed a single word of it. Diane Kessler's younger sister knew that Diane would sooner cut off her own hand than leave that little girl behind. For 4 decades, she said so to anyone who would listen. And for 4 decades, nobody did. Then, in the spring of 2024, a backhoe clearing an old stock pond at the edge of the Kessler place struck something it was never meant to find. And the truth that had been lying a quarter mile from Diane's own front door for 41 years finally came up into the light. What that gnaw revealed would not just name a killer. It would expose a lie so patient, so complete, that a grown woman had spent her entire life grieving a mother she'd been told chose to leave her. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to the autumn of 1983. Because to understand what was stolen, you first have to understand who Diane Kessler was. Harlow, Iowa, in 1983 was the kind of place where the whole town could hear the grain dryers running at night, a low, steady hum that meant the harvest was in and everyone had made it through another year. There were maybe 1,100 people, 1 blinking traffic light, a Casey's, a Lutheran church, and a diner where the coffee was bad and the pie was worth the trip anyway. It was the middle of the farm crisis, and everybody knew it. Land prices had collapsed. The bank in the next county over had already taken 2 family operations that spring, and the men who gathered at the diner counter talked in low voices about interest rates and auctions and whose place might go next. But even in a hard year, people looked out for each other. Neighbors kept spare keys on hooks by the door. Children rode their bikes to the edge of the fields and back with nobody watching, because everybody was watching. That was the world Diane Kessler lived in, and by every account, she was one of its brightest lights. Diane was 26 years old. She worked 3 days a week as a nurse's aide at the county care home over in Red Wing, changing bedsheets and reading scripture to old men who had outlived everyone who once knew their names. The families of those residents adored her. She had a way of making the forgotten feel remembered. At home, she was a mother first and always, devoted to her daughter Katie, a round-cheeked 2-year-old who followed her from room to room like a shadow. And Diane had one small habit that everyone who loved her remembered. Every single night, no matter how tired she was, she wound the little music box on Katie's dresser and let it play "You Are My Sunshine" until the child's eyes closed. She never skipped it. Not once. Her sister used to tease her about it. Diane would just smile and say a promise is a promise, even a small one, especially a small one. On the last weekend of October 1983, she told her mother on the phone that she and Katie were going to drive up to see the leaves along the river the following Saturday. She never got the chance. In 3 days, none of it would matter anymore. It was a Tuesday night, the 25th of October. The timeline that investigators would eventually piece together, 41 years too late, began around 8 in the evening. That was when Diane's neighbor, Ada Vance, saw the kitchen light on across the gravel road and Diane's silhouette moving behind the curtain, doing the dishes the way she always did after supper. At 8:40, Diane called her sister to ask if she could borrow a casserole dish for church on Sunday. The call lasted 4 minutes. She sounded normal. She said Katie was already down for the night, that she'd wound the music box twice because the little one was fussy. She said Ray was out in the machine shed and had been in a black mood all week about money, though she said it lightly, the way you mention weather. She said she'd stop by Thursday for the dish. Then, she said goodnight. At some point after that call ended, the light in the Kessler kitchen went out. And that is where the record ends. There was no scream anyone heard, no car on the gravel, nothing at all to mark the moment. Ada Vance would say later that she woke once in the night to the sound of the grain dryer running long past when the neighbors usually shut theirs down, and thought nothing of it. A running dryer covers a lot of noise. Whatever happened inside that small house happened fast and quiet. It happened over a casserole dish and a bad mood, and a hard year and 40 acres a man was terrified of losing. She never made it to Thursday. She never made it out of the kitchen. Nobody saw Diane Kessler alive again. The next morning came gray and cold. Ada Vance noticed Diane's car still in the drive, but no smoke from the chimney, which was strange on a frosty morning. Around 9, Ray Kessler drove into town, walked into the diner, and told the men at the counter that Diane was gone. She'd left him. Packed a bag in the night, he said, and gone off with some truckers she'd been seeing on the sly. He said it the way a man says a thing he's ashamed of. He didn't cry. Then he drove out to Ruth's house, Diane's sister, and told her the same story. Ruth said one sentence that she would repeat for the next 41 years. Diane would never leave that baby. Ray didn't answer her. He just looked at the floor. And little Katie, 2 years old, was sitting on the kitchen floor of her father's house, playing with a spoon, not old enough to know that her whole life had already been rewritten around her. The investigation, if you can call it that, was over almost before it started. Sheriff Boyd Hollis had held his job for 18 years and had never worked a homicide, and he had no intention of starting now. He drove out to the Kessler place, looked around the kitchen, and noted a small dark stain near the baseboard by the back door. Ray told him it was blood from a rabbit he'd cleaned that week. Hollis wrote it down and let it go. He found no packed suitcase, but Ray said she'd taken it with her, and that was good enough. Court documents from the eventual trial would later reveal that Hollis never photographed the stain, never sent it to the state lab, never even wrote down which direction the drag marks on the linoleum were pointing, if he noticed them at all. He interviewed exactly 2 people. He decided within 48 hours that Diane Kessler was a grown woman who had left her marriage, which was her legal right, and that no crime had occurred. The case was closed as a voluntary departure. Ruth would not let it go. In those first weeks, she called the sheriff's office so many times that the deputies stopped picking up. She drove to Red Wing and told Diane's co-workers at the care home, who all said the same thing. Diane had never once mentioned another man, had talked about nothing but Katie's 2nd birthday party coming up in November. Ruth wrote to the State Division of Criminal Investigation and got back a single-page letter saying the matter was under local jurisdiction. She hung reward flyers she'd paid for herself, $40 she didn't have, on the corkboard at the Casey's. And all the while, Ray Kessler moved through Harlow as a wronged and grieving man, a single father raising a little girl alone, and the town felt sorry for him. That was the first dead end, and it was the cruelest kind. Because there was no other suspect to eliminate. There was only a story everyone had already agreed to believe, and a woman shouting into a silence that had closed over her sister like water over a stone. The years went by the way years do in a small town, quietly, and all at once. By 1990, 7 of them had passed. The reward flyer at the Casey's had faded to a pale ghost of Diane's face, and one day, it simply wasn't there anymore, and nobody remembered taking it down. Ruth married and had children of her own, but she kept a shoebox in her closet with everything about her sister. The letters, the flyers, a cassette tape of Diane singing in the church choir. She played it sometimes, alone, and each year her sister's voice sounded a little further away. Ray Kessler sold the house but kept the land, The 80 acres with the old stock pond at the back that his own father had dug in the 50s. He remarried. He coached Little League. People said he'd finally moved on, and that it was a mercy. Ray Kessler, meanwhile, aged into a fixture of the town. There is a photograph from a church picnic in the summer of 1998, 15 years on, that would later run in the county paper beside the news of his arrest. In it he is laughing, a paper plate in one hand, one arm around his second wife, and a teenage Katie standing a little apart at the edge of the frame, with her arms crossed. Everyone who looked at that picture in 1998 saw a family that had survived a hard thing. Nobody saw what the picture actually was. That is the terrible arithmetic of a lie told well. It does not just hide the truth. It rewrites everyone who lives inside it, turns grieving people into liars without their knowledge, makes a whole town into unwitting witnesses for the wrong side. And Katie grew up. That was the part that would break your heart if you let it. She grew up in Harlow believing, because her father told her so and everyone around her confirmed it with their silence, that her mother had chosen to walk away from her in the night. She carried that the way you carry a stone sewn into your coat. She was a difficult teenager and a guarded adult, and she told a counselor once, years later, that she had spent her whole life trying to figure out what a 2-year-old could possibly have done to make her own mother leave. Ruth tried gently over the years to tell her niece another version. But how do you fight a father's word with only a feeling? The detective who'd first waved off the case had long since retired, and then died, and the file with the rabbit bloodstain in it sat in a cardboard box in the basement of the county courthouse, and the world went on and buried Diane Kessler a second time, under 40 years of ordinary days. Every case we bring you on this channel represents weeks of digging through old records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved so much better than to be forgotten. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like Diane's, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Now, let's get back to Harlow. It was March of 2024 when everything changed, and it changed by accident. The 80 acres had passed to a young couple who'd bought it cheap to run a few head of cattle, and the old stock pond at the back had silted up to a swampy nothing. They hired a man with a backhoe to clean it out. On the second afternoon, the operator felt the bucket catch on something that wasn't a rock. He climbed down to look, and then he climbed right back up and called the county. What the medical examiner's office recovered from the mud over the following week was a human skeleton, wrapped in the rotted remains of a bedsheet, with a small tarnished ring still resting among the bones of one hand. The remains went to the state crime lab, and this is where the science that would undo 41 years of lies finally entered the story. Because the case had been closed as a runaway and not a death, Diane Kessler had never been entered into any missing persons or unidentified remains database in the modern sense. She existed nowhere. So the lab did two things. First, they extracted DNA from the inner shaft of a long bone where genetic material survives longest, and compared it against a reference sample. The method is simpler than people imagine. When a body is unidentified, investigators find a living relative, a mother, a sibling, a child, and compare shared genetic markers, because family members carry overlapping DNA passed down the same bloodline. Ruth Mercer, now in her 70s, drove to the lab and gave a swab from the inside of her cheek without being told why. And on a Thursday morning, cold case investigator Grace Halvorson of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation took a phone call, set down her pen, and read the result twice to be sure. The remains in the pond were Diane Kessler. She had never left Harlow at all. Halvorson was the one who drove out to tell Ruth. Ruth didn't cry at first. She just nodded slowly, the way a person nods when a thing they have known for 41 years is finally spoken aloud by someone with a badge. "I told them," she said quietly. "I told all of them." Then she asked the only question that mattered. If Diane never ran away, then who put her in that pond? Halvorson already knew the ground she had to walk, and she knew that a bloodline test had proven whose body it was, but not yet who had ended her life. For that, she went looking for something everyone in 1983 had decided to ignore. She went looking for a rabbit. The second piece of Dina is what closed the trap, and it had been sitting in a courthouse basement the entire time. In the old case box, beneath Sheriff Hollis's thin notes, was a single item nobody had ever tested. A square of linoleum that a young deputy, going slightly beyond his orders, had cut from the Kessler kitchen floor in 1983 and bagged. The piece with the dark stain Ray had called rabbit blood. 41 years in a paper envelope had degraded it. But modern testing needs only the faintest trace. The lab ran it. The stain was human. And the Dina in that blood matched the bloodline reference from Ruth's cheek swab exactly. It was Diane's blood, spilled on her own kitchen floor on the night she vanished, preserved by the one honest instinct of a forgotten deputy and ignored by everyone who outranked him. Ray Kessler had told the sheriff it was a rabbit. For 41 years, that lie had held. It did not hold anymore. To understand how it held so long, you have to understand how Ray Kessler appeared to the people of Harlow. He was not a frightening man. That was the whole trick of him. He was soft-spoken and reliable, the kind of neighbor who'd pull your truck out of a ditch in a February storm and wave off your thanks. He had raised his daughter, buried his own parents, remarried a church-going woman, and grown old with a good name. When investigators came to his door in April of 2024, he was 81, thin and steady, and he told them the same story he told in 1983, almost word for word, as if he'd been rehearsing it his whole life. "She left me," he said. "She met somebody." Halvorson sat across from him and laid it out slowly. The pond, the bones, the ring, the bloodline match. And finally, the linoleum. She watched the story he'd guarded for 4 decades meet the one thing it could not survive, which was the truth, spoken plainly, in a room he could not walk out of. Records of the interrogation show he was quiet for a long time. Then he said 7 words that his daughter would have to live with for the rest of her life. "I never meant for it to happen." He offered no more than that, and the how of it he took with him. But the where and the who were finished. The arrest went through Harlow like a crack through ice. People who had felt sorry for Ray Kessler for 41 years, who had brought him casseroles in his grief and clapped for him at Little League games, now understood that they had comforted the man who did it. Some refused to believe it even then. Most simply went silent, the way a town goes silent when it realizes a story it told itself for 2 generations was never true. Ray Kessler was charged with second-degree murder. He did not live to see a full trial. His health failed that winter. But court documents record that he entered a guilty plea from a hospital bed in December of 2024. 41 years and 2 months after the night, he told the neighbors his wife had run off with a stranger. The plea is on the record now, permanent, in his own words. Whatever piece he'd stolen for himself for 4 decades, it did not follow him out of that room. Diane Kessler was 26 years old. She read scripture to dying men who had no one else. She sang in a church choir, and there is a tape of her voice that still exists, thin and sweet across 40 years. She wound a music box every single night because she had made her daughter a small promise, and she was the kind of person who kept even the small ones. That was who she was, and none of it was ever in question, except in the one place it mattered most, in the heart of the little girl who grew up believing she had been left behind. Katie is 43 now. When investigators told her the truth, that her mother had been a quarter-mile away the whole time, that she had never chosen to leave, that she had been coming to check on her that very night, Katie did not speak for a long while. Then she asked if she could have the music box, if it still existed somewhere in an evidence room. And Ruth, who had carried the truth alone for 41 years and finally set it down, said the thing that the whole long story had been building toward. Your mother never left you. Not for 1 second. She was trying to get back to you the whole time. Diane Kessler was laid to rest in the spring of 2025 in the Harlow Lutheran Cemetery, beside her own mother, under a stone that gives her real dates at last. The county has since reopened 3 other cases that Sheriff Boyd Hollis closed as voluntary departures in the years he wore the badge. And somewhere in an evidence log there is a note about a square of old linoleum and a young deputy who, against orders, decided that a stain was worth saving. He never knew what it would prove. He only knew it wasn't right to throw it away. Justice for Diane came 41 years late, carried the last mile by science that could read a truth out of degraded blood and old bone, but it was set in motion long before that, by a sister who refused to be quiet, and a deputy who refused to look away. So I'll leave you with a few questions tonight. When a case is closed too easily, as Diane's was in 1983, how many other Dianes are still waiting in courthouse basements for a technology that already exists? What does it say about the ones we trust most, that a lie told softly and often enough can outlast the truth for 2 generations? And if you had been Ruth, dismissed for 41 years, would you have found the strength to keep saying the thing that everyone told you was wrong? Let us know in the comments. Justice found Diane Kessler after 41 years. Her story is why this channel exists, because the truth, however long it is buried, still finds its way up into the light. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting for you in the description below. Thank you for being here with us tonight.